Hi, I'm Dr. Randy Bach. Today's April 26, 2024. And I'm honored to have with us. I'm going to start that over again. Hi, everybody. Today's April 26, 2024, and I'm honored to have with us Dr. Mary Talley Bowden. Mary, tell us what's been going on with you, Ivermectin, the courts, your reputation, the Houston Chronicle, whatever else.
Wow. Well, there's a lot. I can't remember where we left off, but I guess the biggest thing is we have a win with the FDA. And so myself and two other physicians, Dr. Paul Merrick and Dr. Robert Apter, sued the FDA. And this started in November of 2022. And it was all over their infamous horse tweet that went viral. It reached, I believe, 24 million people in the first week. It had dire consequences because of that tweet, they maligned ivermectin and cast it as a medication only for horses. And subsequently, it became almost impossible for my patients to get the medications they needed. We had to jump through hoops. It's still ongoing. I don't know if you follow me on X, but even yesterday, I still have pharmacists who are unwilling to dispense the medication. So we sued them, and it's been a battle. It was initially dismissed based on this concept of sovereign immunity. Sovereign immunity basically means that if the government is acting within the boundaries of what they are allowed to do, you are not allowed to sue them. And so the case was initially dismissed, saying the FDA was allowed to do that, but we took it to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And there, the judges disagreed and said that we do have a case, and basically the FDA lawyer was forced to admit that doctors are allowed to prescribe off-label, and that the FDA does not have authority to control that. So it went back to the district court, and then the FDA challenged us again based on standing, meaning that as the plaintiffs, we have to prove that we have actual harm from what the FDA did, and that addressing that harm would result in some relief for the plaintiffs. And the district judge ruled that I had standing, unfortunately ruled that the other two doctors didn't. Not quite sure why. We don't have a written order on that yet. But nonetheless, it allowed the case to go forward. And at that point, the FDA came back and wanted to settle. And we had to debate, do we settle and take the win? Because they were agreeing to do everything we asked them to do in the first place. We basically wanted the tweets taken down. They also had a page on their website saying that ivermectin cannot be used for COVID. We wanted that taken down. So they agreed to do that, and we had to weigh do we press on, try to get discovery? We decided that that was risky because we could ultimately lose, and the government has ways of not, skirting around discovery, which I have discovered now with my case with the Texas Medical Board, because we've been in discovery and have gotten absolutely nothing that we wanted to get. So we decided to just take the settlement offer, and the FDA was forced to take down the infamous horse tweet and take down the misinformation on their webpage.
Yeah, well, that's a total victory. It's not total victory. I mean, total victory. I've seen enough horror movies to know that you get. Everyone sits and relaxing on the porch after they got the monster, whatever, the zombie, I don't know, alien, whatever, and they're all just sitting around having tea or beer or something like that, and then it kind of raises up again. And I think unless you, generally and genuinely put a stake through the heart of the vampire, there's potential he's going to be around sucking some more blood. I'm not sure that there's lessons learned. I think they do what they want to do. We see a lot of this with the kind of misinformation, endless appeals to authority. Recently the Australian Prime Minister, I think his name is Anthony Albanese, violated the strength of his Italian heritage, at the very least, by saying, he doesn't want anyone to make a meme about him, mistaking himself perhaps for Xi Jinping or Joseph Stalin. Unless you kind of hit back good and hard. I mean, it's good you have a settlement, and I'd like to hear kind of what the statute structure of that is, and what are the what are the ramifications? Are there going to be any actual changes?
Right. I mean, unfortunately, this was not a murder trial. Because I would, a lot of people are saying, well, what does this really accomplish? I mean, basically, our goal was to have them take the misinformation down, but it also sets a precedent. The next time they try to pull a stunt like this, we have this lawsuit in the books, and it also, it's about ivermectin, but it's more about the doctor-patient relationship. And as I'm sure you know, I mean, prior to the pandemic, I really didn't think twice about the FDA. I mean, I'm not trying to produce a medication for manufacture or distribution, so why would I really care what the FDA thinks? And never given a thought to prescribing things off label. But all of a sudden, the FDA is telling doctors what they can prescribe for a certain disease, and they've never done that in the past. And now we hope that they've been stopped from doing this in the future.
Yeah, no, I hope so. I coincidentally, I don't think it's ironic, but I think it's coincidental. Well, or it's in theme with. I have a case that I put through the First Circuit, First District Court, and then First Circuit Court of Appeals. It's emanating from my own stuff, and I don't expect you to be an expert on me per se, but I had a suspension in 2014. I'm a general practice physician. I had my own practice for 27 years, no malpractice cases. Not everyone loved me. I'm not all that lovable, but many people did, and I think I was a competent doctor. I'm good at explaining things, and people, would oftentimes, and we have the mecca of medicine here. We have Mass General Hospital, Brigham and Women's, all these great Tufts and all these great hospitals. But people would come back oftentimes disoriented, like, the doctor didn't really spend time with me. They're doing more rounding and whatever else research, and I would kind of, explainer guy, and so I had my own niche, and along the way, I'm a solo guy, so I wound up doing other things. Viagra came out, I did some of that, and that kind of became a piece of the practice. And I had to make my own bills paid. And when Suboxone came out, I'm like, I could do that anyway. So I had a Suboxone practice, but it was different from the other ones because even though they told us when they educated us, they said you could either do the detox or you could do maintenance. And I thought, well, this is something different. The purpose of Suboxone, I don't want to waylay too much. The purpose of Suboxone is to get, to be a cleaner methadone, to get people out of the methadone clinics. And I wanted people to move to sobriety. So I thought like Goldilocks, one bed's too hard, one bed's too soft. I thought that were too short. People rebound. And I thought forever, with maintenance, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, whatever, or forever is too long. So I thought, well, I'm going to do Suboxone. I kind of iterated a little bit. I wound up with like 4 months detox. And that's how long it takes you to kind of get over a broken heart, a death in your family, that kind of stuff. People grieve. I get it. And they grieve when they're losing their narcotics. They're miserable. I understand that. And so to get down from the euphoria, the false euphoria of drugs, I gave them 4 months. And it wasn't for everybody, but I had a reasonably high success rate. The people who wanted it did very well. And especially if you had a rationale, like you're, going to be drug tested at work, or you're going, you want to get custody of your kids, whatever, all that kind of thing. There were people with reasons and rationales to want to detox, and you're pregnant, that kind of stuff. So I was getting people clean. Did I please everybody? No, because I don't do that. A lot of people wanted to go back up on their drugs, and they wanted to do other drugs while they're doing it. And I'm kind of a doctor. I had a nickname as, not the James Bond villain, but I was called Dr. No. I would say no to that because I wanted people to get kind of the scaffolding to get out from addiction and to reach a sober, better life. So I had a page, Get Your Life Back. That's my ostensible reason. So I kind of in the adaptive model of addiction, not the disease model of addiction. I think you can adapt your circumstances. And the fact we see more and more people on opiates, I think kind of, contradicts the disease model. Anyway, that's preface. But one drug addict, and actually a couple, wound up being 3 ultimately, but like 1 per year would complain about me once this program started because, mean Dr. Bach, I didn't get what I wanted, whatever. And so they would write, the best thing to do is write a letter to the board, boom. And the board back maybe 20, 30 years ago would have said, oh, well, this guy's a felon, not me, the other guy. And there's Dr. Bach, he went through all his education, he parks his car in the right spot, no traffic tickets, all that kind of stuff. Whom are we going to believe? But it's not then, it's now. And back in 2014, before the word woke was around, I think the board was woke, and they suspended me over a false complaint by a guy it was a ludicrous complaint. He wrote it 4 months later, and he's like bigger and younger, like 300 pounds, and he kind of said that I had poked him in the stomach and this and that, and the board went with him. I mean, if any of that had happened, he would have crushed me. And there were 6 or 7 other people in the office at the time, and nothing happened at the time. Anyway, all that aside, the first 3. Sorry for the long preface, but the first 3 allegations or so were about the way I practice medicine for addiction. They said, first allegation: Dr. Bach does not see narcotic addiction as a disease. Okay. And then the number one is second is he's tapering people to sobriety. And number 3 is he thinks, he talks to patients about things that aren't just their medical problem. He talks to them about, their jobs and lives and blah, blah, blah. Okay. Like, dude, like, maybe I maybe missed. Anyway, I didn't really think about it at the time because I didn't really look at it that way. But I've had some help since then from kind of a medical legal bunch of friends of mine. And I want to make a case on the Sherman Act, a single count Sherman Act violation against 2 erstwhile chair/co-chair of the medical board in Massachusetts over the fact that they hounded me out of medicine over my medical ideas, which, getting back to the sovereign immunity thing, this is actually central to my case. And I'm going to be filing a Supreme Court cert petition shortly. And I'm honored to have kind of pro bono representation on this because I think it's an important case. It's kind of a First Amendment case, and I forget which other amendment, but basically, the right to do your own practice and to be unfettered by overweening boards. And the board in this case probably loses their sovereign immunity. You have the expression ultra vires there, ultra vires, but in Latin ultra vires, outside their strength. When the board is acting within its strength, they have policing powers and they are able to do what they're able to do. And the police can't, like regular police, if they knock on your door and they wind up, turning things over and so forth, and it turns out they had the address wrong, they're actually completely covered. They made an honest mistake. If Tony Soprano pays them to do that, then they are prosecutable. They do things for malfeasant reason. And the Sherman Act actually stipulates that when they are acting, even though they're not doing addiction medicine, people on the board per se, but they're in that same sphere, if they're acting like a restrictive board, they are restricting trade based on their own ideas. If the state tells them to do that, state says, look, Dr. Bach is completely wrong. Narcotic is officially in Massachusetts a disease. And you can officially not taper anybody to sobriety. You officially, and the state says that, and the board acknowledges it, so forth, then they're perfectly fine to suspend me for it. But they can't do it out of their own head, and they can't do it out of whole cloth. And I apologize for that discourse. But this is yet another example, along with Ivermectin, of the boards trying to act like generals in a war. And I think that's perfectly appropriate for a general in a war. You're a private, I'm a sergeant, or vice versa. And they tell us, we want you to wear little, green ribbons, whatever, celebrate Earth Day. You know what? You're in the Army. Boom, you put the thing on. You say, yes, sir, ma'am, thank you very much. That's what you do. But we as physicians have never been that. Our pact is with the patient. We have our degrees. We're certified. We're licensed. And the board is allowed to make sure, there are no felons. And if you murdered your wife, you're not no longer a doctor. I get it. Beat up your patients, all that stuff. And maybe even worse, whatever. But to practice medicine under the precepts of medicine, they can't do it unless there's state law to do it. They can't do this out of whole cloth. They can't do it out of their minds because they feel that way. They can't have the feels and then ruin your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, bless you for treating patients that most doctors wouldn't treat, and then doing it, going above and beyond and actually treating them as human beings and having real conversations. And
no, it's true. And I didn't have a PA. I didn't have a nurse practitioner. I saw all the patients, and for better, for worse, and I had standards for them, and again, I don't want to talk too much about myself because this is really an interview of you, but I'll just give you one quick example. I had a corrections officer, no pun intended, because he was trying to correct his life, maybe the first time not so well. And he was shuttling drugs in and out of the prisons. And that's a crime in and of itself. But then he's taking a little bit off the top. That's a second crime because he's doing crime against the criminals. Maybe that's not a crime. But then he's using it and abusing it and so forth. And so his life was bad. And I gave him kind of the tough love approach and tried to get him off. And, and he's showing up with other drugs in the system along the way. And I don't think that's taken seriously. I'm not going to write you this pseudo morphine if you're going to be taking the regular heroin kind of morphine yourself, with diacetylmorphine. That doesn't work for me. And we, anyway, he wound up leaving my place in a huff, and he's a big guy. and screamed epithets in front of other. This is kind of a difficult part of having that type of practice meshed in with the irregular practice. Anyway, he did all that, so it was embarrassing and so forth. Anyway, I never 5 months later, 4 months, he comes back. I'm like, I don't have, my Alzheimer's not really that bad yet. So I remember you. You're like, you were just here not that long ago. And didn't you scream and call me X, Y, and Z, the biggest leak hole in the whole world? He says, well, yes, I did. And I sort of apologized it, but here I am. I'm having more trouble, blah, blah, blah. I said, well, why did you come back here then? He says, well, for my problem, I think I need a bleep hole such as yourself. Basically a tough love guy. That's what I need. And I understand it's not for everybody at every time. Anyway, I think that people needed you at that time. They didn't, other people could have gone to Dr. Smith, Dr. Jones, and Dr. You name it, Dr. Fauci, et cetera, and gotten, the fifth vaccine, or whatever, everything they or nothing, so forth. But I think it's well within physicians' rights to prescribe things off label. Now, I don't think you have the right necessarily to prescribe strychnine or perform euthanasia in your office unless it's Oregon or something like that. But you were working well within the precepts of medicine. I'm wondering if you just kind of, for our audience, talk about the ivermectin story, in your office at that time.
So I stumbled into COVID because I was using this lab I'm an ear, nose, and throat doctor, and I was using this lab for patients with chronic sinusitis. They were doing a PCR bacterial test for chronic sinusitis. Then they came out with a PCR saliva test for COVID. And my office is located in a strip center, so it's very easy. Patients could come up into their cars. We'd hand them a cup. They would stay in their car, spit in the cup, and there'd be contact free. And so my little clinic exploded because everybody wanted to come get this test. We had fast turnaround times. And then I would tell people, go see your primary care doctor for treatment. And we know how that went down. They'd come back and say, well, my primary care doctor said, don't do anything until you can't breathe and go to the emergency room. And that didn't sit well with me. So initially, I didn't know about ivermectin for a little bit. And I just used common sense. I used breathing treatments, steroids, antibiotics. And then when monoclonal antibodies came out, I started using those. Those worked very well. Then the government took over distribution. It became harder and harder to get them. And that's when I started using ivermectin. I was nervous about using it because of all the hype. I didn't think it would work. And I thought, well, it must not be safe. So I went to the FDA's website and I dug into it deeply. I looked at the toxicity studies when the drug was approved by the FDA. And I also did a literature search looking for accidental, intentional overdoses from ivermectin, and could not find anything concerning. So I started to use it with skepticism because I thought, well, it's not going to work. But now I've treated over 6,000 patients, and everybody that received early treatment is alive and well. And I honestly have more people complain of side effects with all the antibiotics I use than I do with ivermectin.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a funny thing. I mean, I think there's a Nobel Prize associated with the invention of ivermectin. It's been around, and it's technically not an antiviral, but physicians have had long-term the use to use medications off-label. I think we discussed this on our last visit together, and people can find that. But since we're here now, I might as well say it for our new audience, unless there's overlap. But Viagra, which arguably could have prevented World War II if it had been invented, 100 years before. I think, Mr. Adolf, I can't remember his last name. I think he had some sexual frustrations and so forth. And if Viagra had been around, God knows, I mean, maybe he would not have had the animus against other people in groups that he might have had, out of, issues in his own life. We'll leave it there. But Viagra was a cardiac medicine, and I guess, I mean, it didn't ever get approved that way. But in a sense, that was off-label use right from the beginning. They found out it had a secondary usage. Whoever was taking it for their opening up their arteries, they had other things open up for them, other vistas and whatnot. And people use finasteride as Propecia for your hair, but it was a prostate medication. And the other one, Rogaine, was a blood pressure medication. People were taking blood pressure medication, and I don't know if they rubbed it on their head somehow, and they found they're growing hair. Okay, great, wonderful. So, but for a long period of time, before you could get the prescription version of Rogaine. The doctors were taking minoxidil, crushing it, putting in a little bit of hand lotion, and physicians had people rubbing on their head. Aspirin, it's used for heart prevention, was never, for a long time, was never labeled for that, but people thought it prevented stroke. Fine, they did that, and other people used other medications all along the way. And this is all part and parcel of discovery. As long as something has baseline safety. I mean, I think, again, I wouldn't recommend, I don't know, if somebody has a pain on his wrist, I wouldn't recommend, wrapping himself with an anaconda or, getting a cobra pet, or a viper, to kind of treat his mosquito bite. I think there are limits, but if as long as your risk is low and there's possible benefit, I think you're well within your, and frankly, if we got rid of everything that people do based on the fact that we don't have proven results, I personally think, a good fraction of maybe chiropractic and physical therapy and, a decent half of medication and medicine would disappear right off the bat. If we had as high a threshold of people tried to put on for ivermectin, almost nothing would be around anymore. People obviously also people do a lot of things that are not necessarily to their benefit. People, as far as medically go, people have all kinds of cosmetic things done. And, there's not necessarily a good medical rationale for it. People want to do it. So they do it electively. There was nothing really preventing anybody from getting ivermectin electively, given that it was reasonably safe. I mean, was it safer than getting, Hillary Clinton getting Botox or Hillary Clinton getting, what are those injections, what they call that stuff, fillers and so forth. I mean, is it safer? I don't know. But Hillary wanted it. She got it done. I don't really care. And if she wanted to get ivermectin at the same time, 7 years ago, when she was getting her Botox, I mean, who cares? Nobody cares, really. It seems like it's a pact between you and the physician, as long as you are, again, doing no harm. Mm-hmm. So your life kind of got turned upside down, I imagine. Are you still doing Breathe Med and your ENT stuff? And how did your business go?
Yeah, it is. People who come see me are like-minded, so they Google me first, and they either go one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
My income has definitely decreased. I looked at my, just turned in my taxes and went down significantly. But everybody that comes to see me is like-minded, so I don't feel like the patients that see me are against me in any way. It's the media, it's hard to say what's going on. I mean, I think if you Google my name, the first thing that comes up is all the medical board stuff.
Yeah, no, I did that today.
Yeah,
and I also followed you on LinkedIn. And I saw some guy, RN in Ireland, has you as basically a quack. He points up Quack Watch, which I guess is a site, and they have you, and you're destroying the world and all that kind of stuff. Do you deal with those things? Do you answer them? I mean, what?
Yeah, it used to bother me. Now I just laugh. But sometimes I answer them but I don't lose any sleep over the people like that anymore. Just because, I've built a huge following on X. I have over 300,000 followers. And you look at other doctors like myself, and, our accounts are huge, much bigger than the other side. Now we don't have CNN and mainstream media backing us, but I feel like, they're losing steam. And it's just I do feel like public sentiment is changing, especially when you look at the uptake of the latest booster. I think we're up to 9 shots now, and the numbers vary, but I'm pretty sure fewer than 10% of the population is continuing to get these shots.
Yeah, no, I'm awfully puzzled by the whole thing. I would venture to say I'm older than you. I remember a time back in the deep dark ages. And I think I don't know if Dr. Fauci does remember it, but, he was on in 2005, I think, and whatever the flu du jour was that year, he was on a regular talk show, and somebody called in and asked, I already had the flu this year's, let's say it was January, whatever. I already had this season's flu. Should I get this season's flu shot? and I excuse me, but I like doing this. He's like, I'm paraphrasing. He's like, well, there's no reason you should get the flu shot for this year. You've already had the flu. The flu itself is far better than any vaccine you could have. That's the entire virus. A vaccine is only a little piece. And it's not going to give you any additional coverage because you already have this. So anyway, it's closing the barn door after the horses have left. Or in the case of vaccine, I mean, it gets named after cows originally, vaccinia, which is named, it's cowpox. So after the cows have left. So, and I remember even before that, that we would only give a flu shot for that flu season. I mean, I know there's like a ballast of part of the flu shot is kind of like regular general, influenza vaccine, influenza virus bits and pieces. But every year they have the H and the N, kind of like a two-armed bandit, or one-armed bandit with two rollers, H2N6, whatever happens to be that year, they put those specifically in. And if it's H2N6 one year and it's H3N2 the next year, then they take that first one out, they put the second one in. And they don't take the last year's one and call it a booster because they haven't made one for the new one. And so when we saw the kind of the procession of the various Greek letter variant strains of the VOC, variants of concern, and the vaccine didn't change, that was a warning sign. I mean, it's like you're giving everyone an out of date one, then to call it a booster is a total break with medical tradition. No one would ever have taken last year's flu shot next year and then call it a booster for the next year one, because the strains have changed. Everyone knew that. Oh, it's not like, anybody, you'd have to have just awakened from a deep, I don't know, it's a Rumpelstiltskin kind of sleep, not to be able to see this. And this whole, everything was backwards. Natural immunity is not as important as vaccine immunity. I mean, Dr. Fauci should have talked to Dr. Fauci. I mean, he knew better. 20 years prior, he knew better. 15, I guess, from 2020. He knew better. And then now all of a sudden he knew worse. I mean, I think that is a very, interesting, sad situation. And I am not an anti-vaccine guy. I've given out thousands of vaccines myself, and I've taken dozens of flu shots even through the years. I've kind of stopped lately, but, I just think there was something amiss there. What do you think was amiss? What do you think was going on?
It's a lot of money. There's just so much. There's so many layers to this onion. But I'd say money was a predominant force. They'd already had this vaccine before the disease was unleashed. And there's just too much money, too big to fail, right? I mean, that's what it boils down to. And then, there may be the depopulation agenda as well. But I think it's a little harder to prove, but the money certainly is right there in front of everybody's face.
Yeah. It's funny when you said depopulation agenda. I first heard you say depopulation gender. I mean, I misheard you, but it's an interesting homonym because, the gender stuff is basically depopulation. And, you're basically you're taking away the pro-generative aspect with people's genitals and their gender. It's all the same root word: genes, generations, progeneration, so forth. And we are making people genderless essentially, and neutering them. I mean, we do it to cats and dogs, I guess, but people do it to their own kids. I mean, by proxy through physicians. And so physicians, I think, are a pretty malleable bunch. I used to think there was kind of this, this Hippocratic oath, and I thought there was kind of a obeisance, a respect for physical characteristics, immutable ones, and we see this just kind of go by the wayside. I'm very disappointed in medicine writ large.
Yeah, well, I'm not that surprised, because to become a doctor, you have to make straight A's, you have to follow the rules, you can't be one of those rebels to get into medical school. And then our training is very rigid. You go outside the lane, they smack you down, right? I'm not in the military, but I imagine
I have the bruises.
Right. I do. I mean, I have a little bit of PTSD from residency. It was not a warm, fuzzy place, right? And you learned not to. I mean, I remember I was an intern and I got upset because we would not have our lab results back by the time we had rounds at like 6 a.m. They would wake up the patients, I think, at 4 a.m., which I didn't see the sense of that. And then the results wouldn't be back. So
Oh my God.
I went down to the lab director. And I raised hell about that, and then I
Yep.
got labeled as the troublemaker.
That's funny. Yeah. And I mean, looking back, I thought I was a good little kid. I got all the grades you mentioned, and I got into Yale and I got into top medical school, and I did okay. Then I passed everything, and I got residencies. I could have, I got into Yale psychiatry. Ultimately, I didn't go there, but I wound up taking a year off. I think there was a little bit of this cowboy rebel thing in me that I don't know. It was kind of bristling, I guess. I mean, there were aspects and moments of it. I started a psychiatry residency and I didn't finish it. I think it was kind of a mutual distaste. There were a lot of crazy. I mean, literally, figuratively, a lot of crazy things going on at psychiatry at Mass General at the time. But there was like a certain rigidity that I guess I didn't take to, or it didn't take to me, or whatever. People, I don't want to go into. It's not. I don't. It's not time for Randy History Hour, but I think there were signs on the wall, and I don't think that what happened to me should have happened to me, but I was kind of on the edges in a sense by having my own practice, and it just gave me the opportunity to think about the things I want to do. There were these polls of our doctors satisfied in their practice year after year. I was always when I started working for myself, I was always very happy, and I didn't have an enormous practice, but I had, again, there's an old expression that people look like their dogs, that they kind of pick the dogs that are like them, and in a sense, I don't want to call my patients dogs, but in a sense, the people who wanted the type of things that I could bring to them came to me, and the ones who didn't. So it was a self-selecting iterative process over 27 years I had that practice, and there were a lot of people who wanted themselves some Randy Bach, and they got it, and a lot of people didn't. Fine. But I didn't have the unhappiness in medicine because I had my own staff. They were receptive. I saw all my patients, and everything got worked out. I think there's a lot of frustration in medicine amongst doctors because they are in this position where they are trained to be, Green Berets, but they are actually just in the food line. They're just, they are more like the privates in the military on KP, or barracks duty or whatever. And so I think they get this, they think they're physicians and they are professionals, but they're very locked into a system, and the system has its own rigidities that is guiding things for them. So I think the fact that you and I are both, different, obviously, but in our own types of practice and running, I think you run your own show. I think, gives a different way of thinking about things, and gives you the ability to kind of look back and see what's what, and try to gauge and figure out the best thing. I wasn't doing crazy stuff. I was handing out blood pressure pills and, giving insulin for diabetics. I wasn't trying to reinvent medicine. But when people did have quandaries or queries about things they wanted to do, I just didn't have some kind of like top-down dictum that I had to follow. And I mean, the irony is I didn't practice during COVID. I had my license back in 2020, but I was kind of my resume had PTSD, basically. I mean, nobody wanted to hire me for the suspension, and so I wasn't getting much work. I was getting work on the margins. People wanted to talk out their COVID questions and vaccine questions, and so forth. But had I been in practice then, and frankly in practice now, when people come in and they want to, self-castrate and stuff like that, I don't know how and what I would do. I mean, it's just like I am practicing now part-time, but those things that haven't come up. It's just, I think, a difficult place that people find themselves when medicine gets political.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was very anti don't mix medicine and politics at the start of the pandemic. So I thought it weakened the argument, and now I just feel like it's unavoidable. I mean, if we don't get our politicians involved, we're running down a very slippery slope.
Right. I mean, and unfortunately, it's only just to keep keep the field clean. It's basically like I'm going to make a terrible example. I'm sorry, but basically, let's say there's a soccer game going on. I mean, everyone on the field knows the rules. They've been playing soccer forever, and they have game after game after game. And it turns out other people are putting landmines on the field, and soccer players are blowing up. Whatever. It's like now all of a sudden you need like a mine sweeper for soccer. It has nothing to do with it. It shouldn't be there in the first place. But you have to clean the field so people can play soccer just as they always were. It has nothing to do with soccer. Nothing to do with the players. We all know how to play. We all know what the field is. And the example, I mean, terrible metaphor, I'm sorry, but the first one I can think of. But the example here is that we need politicians to mind sweep for us because people have been putting these things that are extraneous to the practice of medicine on our field of practice. And I think that's a sadness. And I think the ivermectin story and is hugely instructive. I mean, the fact that something was a horse dewormer has nothing to do with it being something else. I mean, horses do take antibiotics. You know, they take, you know, they don't actively go to Walgreens or CVS. And you know, the hard thing is they can't get the prescriptions out of their pocket with their hooves. But anyway, it's like, but you know, they've been given penicillin endlessly, and so have cows and so forth. And that doesn't mean because it's a horse antibiotic or a cow antibiotic that we should stop taking it. I mean, it's idiotic. It's just a stupid rationale. So somebody in marketing came up with that, and then they use it as if that has some sense. You know, if we stop taking everything that we're given to dogs, cats, cows, and horses, then there's, you know, I don't know what percentage, but a lot of our medicines would disappear. My dog got an antidepressant. This is a few dogs ago, but he got an antidepressant. That means, oh my God, that's dog medicine. Stop giving antidepressants. Well, maybe that's a good idea. Maybe it's not. But I wouldn't do that change based on the fact that a dog had gotten it. I mean, that's nonsensical. I mean, I don't even know what to do with it. So can I ask you, I mean, the settlement you got, was that financial? Was that a stipulation? What kind of thing happened? I don't need to know the numbers if it is financial, but what kind of satisfaction do you get from this?
Yeah, there's no money, unfortunately.
Really?
Oh yeah, no money. It's just setting a precedent, basically, and I think it permanently stains their credibility. And now it's going to take we have to reverse 3 years of propaganda. So I haven't seen any immediate changes in public sentiment, or, you know, the pharmacists aren't really backing down yet, but they've been at this for 3 years with billions of dollars backing them. But it sets a precedent. And
so what is literally the settlement then? So what happens in the settlement? What do they say and do?
They had to remove the tweets. They had anything on social media that posted that basically directed the public not to take ivermectin for COVID. So they had to take down their tweets. They had to take down a web page. I know it seems like
no heads.
Victory, but like I said, it sets a precedent.
Huh. Well, and had you not settled, where would it have gone? I mean, was there anything else to happen? Could you, was there?
They agreed to what we were seeking. So it's not like we were going to gain more other than discovery. So we could have gotten maybe some, but it wouldn't have impacted the outcome of the case in terms of what we were trying to accomplish.
Right. Now, and plus you had to, I assume you or, you know, some group had to pay for your legal expenses. Or did you get those reimbursed?
Well, the lawyers were doing it pro bono.
So what's next on the Mary Talley Bowden stage? Or is it Bowden? I'm Paula.
No, Bowden's correct. I'm dealing with a medical board, and that started 2.5 years ago. And actually Monday, I was supposed to go to trial with them. So they just postponed that until September or October. And it's been a lot of. So they've tried to settle twice with me, but I have refused because it will leave a mark on my record. And so we were taking it to the next level. We were supposed to have an open trial next week where I could bring my witnesses and my experts. Well, they shut down my expert. They gave him 3 days notice. to do a deposition, and he had surgeries scheduled and couldn't do it, and they wouldn't let him reschedule. So we appealed that, and the judge agreed to let us have an expert, but now we have to wait 6 months to do the trial.
So just to clarify, what's this about? Did they suspend you? What was
what's the charge?
The process? What was it?
So I had 2 hospitals, and I don't know why, but these complaints were lumped into one. Basically, Methodist returned me in because I resigned. They're saying I was suspended or under investigation, but we have no evidence showing that I was actually under investigation. But they launched a PR attack against me, and they said they suspended my privileges, and the way I found out was from a reporter sending me a text message asking me to confirm, is it true that your privileges have been suspended? And I did a double take. I was blindsided. I had no idea what they were talking about. And then I go on Twitter, and Methodist is tweeting about me saying that I'm spreading dangerous misinformation that's harmful to the community. And I mean, the story went global. I had people from Australia reaching out to me, good and bad. And it just, it was a huge deal to me, and I resigned because I didn't want anything to do with that hospital. And then they turned me in the medical board for resigning. And then the other complaint is from another hospital, Texas Hughley Hospital, where the wife of a patient was suing the hospital to try to get ivermectin for her dying husband. He was slated for hospice. Hospital would not let her try ivermectin, so she sued, and she asked me to be the expert witness. And basically, everything that happened subsequent to that was under court order and under advisement of the attorney. But they're casting it as, I just waltzed into the hospital and wrote orders on the patient, which is not at all true. But that's the gist of that one. And so
the hospital process. So what is it? Does the board have something against you also? Texas Medical Board?
Well, it's hard to imagine they don't. I mean, now it's going to go out. This is dragging on for 3 years. There's nothing about patient safety involved at all. It's not about, like you said, I mean, the job of the board is to protect the public from dangerous doctors. This is not anything about being a dangerous doctor. But they're just going after me, and they're relentless, and there's all these things going on behind the scenes, shenanigans that show that they are not interested in fairness. They're just trying to make this as painful as possible.
So that's a sadness. So how do you get legal help on this as well?
Well, my malpractice insurance covered it to a limit. I've exceeded that limit. So at this point, I'm on my own. And
I'm kind of missing this a little bit. Are you defending yourself at the medical board or in court against the hospitals? Is it defamation? What's the actual angle right now?
Well, I sued Methodist for defamation, and that case was dismissed. It's on appeal, and I'm waiting decision for that, but I'm not sure when that will happen.
All right. So I'd like people to see this. I know you have this through your Twitter account, Americans for Health Freedom. Can you tell us a little bit about what this is and what is the pledge and what is this about and what's your involvement here?
Yeah, so this started in November of 2023. I stumbled upon a post from a representative in Michigan, Brad Paquette. He's vaccine injured, young guy, ended up with myocarditis and was hospitalized for it. And I just asked him, I just commented on his post, would you be willing to publicly state that the COVID shot should be pulled off the market? And he wholeheartedly responded yes. And it just gave me the courage to ask more politicians. And so this has basically been a social media campaign. I mean, some of it has been off of social media, but gathering politicians who are willing to simply state that the COVID shot should be pulled off the market. And then ancillary to that, we've added a second pledge to not take donations from big pharma. So we're now up to 287 on the list, and it's a range of positions and power. We have, city council members and school board members and precinct chairs, but we also have, Senator Ron Johnson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massey. We have the Surgeon General of Florida. So it's just a wide range, and it just keeps growing. And then I started a 501c4 to try to help support the candidates and the politicians, because they're putting themselves on a blacklist. They're probably not going to get any donations from Pfizer by being on this list.
Yeah, I think there's a world of regulatory capture. Are you familiar with that term? I think that our Fauci-like humans do nice things for the pharma, and then the pharma later on do nice things for them, and potentially before later. So I think who was the head of Tom Frieden, MD? He was the health commissioner under Bloomberg in New York City, and he wound up being Obama's head of the CDC. And then he had these sexual peccadillo, no pun intended, regarding one of his wife's friends or something, kind of. Anyway, but he seems to have landed. I mean, he lost stuff, but he's landed on his feet. He's got like a $500,000 sinecure job at this, nice sounding cardiac-ish kind of thing. I can't remember the name of it, but it's something like, have a heart or whatever. I could find it if I had to, but it's something that you'd have a hard time getting. You'd have a hard time getting, and despite the fact that you have a flawless record, these $500,000 jobs, just for your name, whatever. But so I think it has to do with favors granted, favors received. That Tom Frieden is not Randy Bach. He's not, Mary Talley Bowden, and he's him because he had this stuff. So he, favors granted. He gets to run this thing, despite the fact that he's sort of an embarrassment having pled to these sexual charges. I think they're misdemeanors, but still, that's one more misdemeanor than I've pled to. And I think it would be a hard time. But so I think it's kind of, they take care of their own, I guess, is my point. And I think you're making a reasonable point. And I don't think it's exclusive to medicine. I think this is kind of a standard wraparound kind of thing that happens between officials and those upon whom they're theoretically, doing their bureaucratic special powers. Anyway, that's again, something we have to watch out for. So, any final words for us?
No, I mean, I think I'm glad that you're still interviewing people about COVID, and then I think we still need to keep pressing. Next week, May 1st, so the COVID committee in Congress is interviewing Peter Daszak. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, really?
And also Brooke Jackson's case on May 1st is going to be heard in the district court in Beaumont.
Yeah, she's the RN, is that right?
No, she's the Pfizer whistleblower. She
I remember that.
In their research and exposed the fraud. And so May 1st is a big day. I hope people will be,
I don't know if you have I don't know if you've personally read my I'll put this up here. So Peter Daszak, you mentioned, I write for Brownstone, and this is EcoHealth Alliance's Wuhan virus dalliances. It sort of rhymes. It's how long is the article? I don't know. Listen to a few 13 minutes of listening to it. So this is probably a 10 or 15 page article, something like that. This goes over the whole EcoHealth Alliance issue, and I don't know why it's kind of lost its proper footing here on the left side. Anyway, I don't know if anybody in Congress would like to read this, but I think it kind of covers the whole story pretty well. I spent a lot of time on this, and talks about it's kind of the companion piece to my Dr. Fauci article, which I'd written a couple weeks before. And oddly enough, somebody from EcoHealth Alliance objected to my article. So the article for the article on Dr. Fauci is this one here, Dr. Fauci's own gain of function. And so we've talked a little bit of Fauci here. And at one point I mentioned EcoHealth Alliance, and the people from EcoHealth Alliance wrote to Brownstone and were like, oh, we don't like the way you were characterizing us as being involved in gain of function research in Wuhan. Like, but you were involved in gain of function research in Wuhan. And they had, apparently when I did a thorough search of his letter and I took certain phrases out, apparently he had written that same letter. He's kind of the hack, PR hack. He written that same letter to a bunch of other people, like basically cease and desist. And if it works, it worked, I guess. But, you know, I take those kind of things as a challenge. And so I just kind of, you know, got out my digging tools and did further work. And I think there's a huge complicity. I mean, frankly, you know, I don't know how deep the well goes, but, you know, I think EcoHealth Alliance was essentially a CIA cutout. And we were going to be, I don't know if you know, remember, I used to read Mad Magazine. It was a great cartoonist from Cuba originally, Antonio Porcias. And he did Spy versus Spy. I don't know if you ever saw that comic book. It's a fabulous comic. My kids loved it decades later. Anyway, it's a little bit Spy versus Spy. I think we had EcoHealth Alliance in Wuhan so we could watch them. But I think nobody in China was fooled by that. And they had EcoHealth Alliance so they could get basically, you know, drink your milkshake, kind of take all the technological tools that we had via EcoHealth Alliance, so they could benefit, as they did with car manufacturers, whatnot, who hang out in China. They could kind of suck dry the technological stuff that we brought, and well, we're watching them, but they knew we were watching them. And anyway, so you know, hilarity ensued, as they say in the movies. But if you get a chance and you want to read it, I'd be honored. And if you care to pass it along to anybody who's doing that, let me know.
Yeah, definitely, I will.
All right, so I'm going to end with one final, I guess, additional self-promotion, because I've been doing that fair amount of that today, and I apologize. But if people want to help support my video cast, they can look at yet another pandemic. I started work on this, overturning Zika, before COVID was a thing, before anybody knew this was coming. And I had talks with the guys at JAMA who were going to publish an article. The book came after, but I had an article on Zika because I thought it was a huge puzzlement. That everyone's like, it's horrible, 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 horrible thing. And then it disappeared. And so I'd been researching that in 2019. And I came up with an article, and JAMA was going to publish it, but we didn't get in talks until early 2020. And the erstwhile two editors wound up on a Zoom call with me, Doctors Howard Bauschner and Edward Livingston. And they were the chief and then the medical editor. And Livingston said, well, you know, it's a really good point you make, and we would love to publish your commentary. And since I already had kind of this kerfuffle with the board and whatnot, I thought this was good, you know, reputation resurgence. And I was like, remember being thrilled. Then he said, but it was like February 2020, but there's this coronavirus thing coming around the corner. And you know, we don't want to sow any doubt in the public health establishment, because this actually Dr. Fauci figures into the Zika thing and the CDC and all that kind of stuff. Tom Frieden I mentioned before. And so we don't want to sow any doubt in the public health establishment. I'm like, well, dude, you know, in my mind, dude, isn't that your job to sow doubt everywhere? Isn't that the purpose of a medical journal, scientific journal, to sow doubt? It's how progress, you know. So I didn't have those great words there at the time. I'm like, well, but I think that's still our job to, you know, come to terms with Zika, because there are billions of people on Earth in the tropics who will need to know this. He's like, yeah, you have a point, but no, we're not going to do that. When COVID should just be a couple of weeks, or he didn't call it COVID. This coronavirus should be a couple of weeks, and then we'll get back to you. And of course, it's been years, and they wound up losing their heads, or they did, you know, heady kitty or seppuku, whatever it's called, because of woke cancel culture. Totally different story. And they both had to resign because Livingston said that doctors aren't inherently racist when they practice medicine. Yeah, it's a great story. Anyway, so that's my Zika story. I'm sticking to it, and I very much appreciate your spending the time with me. And I apologize for talking too much today, but I don't know. They were interesting topics.
All right. Well, thanks for having me.